going to talk about the distributive property today. Okay. Distributive property is a rule property that you will have to know from now to the time you graduate high school. Okay, so it's not like I'm going to learn this property and then it's going to go away. Okay, it's not. It's very, very important. Probably just as important as, learning the negatives and positives that we've learned in this chapter. Okay, and what it is basically this. When you talk about the distributive property, we're talking about taking a problem that looks like this, which we have seen in the past, okay, and simplifying it a different way. Okay, and what that means is this. When you use the word distribute, what do you think the word distribute means? Not a mathematical necessarily. When you just hear the word distribute, what do you think it means, Derek? Spread out. Yeah, that's a good way. We can say spread out. Okay, if we're going to distribute all the canned food or the food items that we collected to the needy, what are you doing? Yeah, you're giving them out. Okay, another thing we'd say is we give out. Okay, so those are two expressions that are pretty explanatory of the word distribute. Okay, so when we talk about the distributive property, then what we're talking about is taking the number outside the parentheses and distributing it or spreading it out, giving it out to the numbers inside the parentheses. Now, on the outside, there's no mathematical sign in between the parentheses and the number. So that means we're multiplying. Okay? Anytime, and you've known that, anytime you see a number next to a parentheses without any sign, it means that we're multiplying. Okay? So we're multiplying 4 times 5 plus 4 times 6. Okay, that's what the distributive property does. Now, I know what you're saying in your mind. You're going, well, why don't I just add 5 plus 6? Okay, correct. Okay, that is correct. That is a simpler way to do this specific problem. Okay, but we have to use a simpler problem to learn the distributive property. So in the future, when we don't have simpler problems, for example, Chapter 7, okay, we'll know how to do the distributive property. Okay, and of course at this point, you just multiply those two things out. We take 4 times 5, which is 20, plus 4 times 6, which is 24, and you get a total of 44. Okay, now let me give you an example of the type of problems that you're going to have in the next chapter. And it is the reason why we have to understand the distributive property. You may have the same looking problem, but it looked like that. 4 times parentheses, a plus 6. Okay? You cannot put a and 6 together because we don't know what a is. Okay? And so therefore we have to know the distributive property so we can distribute the 4 just like we did in the previous problem. Okay, it means to multiply right here. Once again, that means to multiply. So we're going to take 4 and multiply it times a plus 4 times 6. Well, we don't know what a is. It could be equal to 5, but we don't know that. They would have to tell us that. Okay, and so what we can do then is we can just simply say 4 times a plus 24. And that would be your answer to that problem. Okay, by using the distributive property. Now, the official distributive property looks like this. Okay, I've given you number examples of the distributive property. When you see the distributive property, what it's going to look like is this. A times B plus C is equal to A times B plus A times C. That's what the official property looks like when you see it in rule form. Most people will call that algebra form. The other way you will see it is this way. A times B minus C equals A times B minus A times C. Okay, so that's the two ways that they're going to express the property using variables instead of numbers. Okay, now it's the same property for both addition and subtraction. For example, if I had 4 times 5 minus 6, okay, it's still the same property. This still means we need to multiply. This still means we got to distribute to the 5 and the 6. And so what that gives me then is 4 times 5 minus 4 times 6. Okay, well 4 times 5 is still 20 minus 4 times 6, which is 24. Now, before last week, we would say, oh, you can't do that. 20 minus 24 you can't do. Well, yes, we can. Because we can change this to 20, change that to addition, and do the opposite of the number behind the subtraction sign, which is negative 24. So that means we're going to have the absolute value of those two numbers, and we're going to subtract the absolute values. 24 minus 20 would be what? 4. And it would be negative 4 because of that negative sign right there. Okay, now, let's look at some ways that the distributive property can make it easier on you. Let's look at this problem. 6 times 1/7 plus 6 times 6/7. Okay? If we look at those two terms, what is common in both the terms? Wait, hang on. What number is common in those two terms? The 6. Okay? 7 is not a number in that. 6/7 is the number in that. Okay? So the common factor is the 6. Well, I can reverse the distributive property Okay, I can reverse the distributive property to help solve this problem. Okay, I can do this. I can take the 6 and put it outside the parentheses. Since it's common, those two are the same. I can bring the 1/7 down. I can bring the plus sign down. And I can bring the 6/7 down. Now that problem's easier. What's 1/7 plus 6/7? 7/7, which is 1. And so I'm just basically taking 6 times 1, which is 6. So instead of having to take and go, okay, 6 times 1/7, which is 6/7, Okay, and then taking 6 times 6 over 7, which would be 36 over 7, and then adding the two together, and then reducing the fraction. I was able to do all of that in basically one step because of reversing the distributive property. Now, your first question is, well, there's 2 6s up there. Why is there only one on the outside? Okay, because we just proved right up here, there's how many 4s on the outside? There's 1, right? 1 circled 4. But when we distribute it, we now have 2 4s because we distributed the outside to the inside. Okay? Well, if we were to take this problem right here and we were to reverse it, then it would look like this when we reverse it. Okay, so just like this, let me show you another one. If I had 3 times 10 plus 3 times 12, well, if I reverse the distributive property, then that would give me 3 times 10 plus 12. That's when we reverse the distributive property. And that's what you get. Okay? Now, let's look at another way we can make this easier on us. Let's see here. Yep, there's one. All right, 4 times 8.1 plus 4 times 2.9. Now, for most of you, you would have to, you'd probably have to do that on paper, but the easier way to do it is this. Our common factor in both of the terms is the 4. So once again, we're going to reverse the distributive property. So that means the 4 here and here come to the outside of the parentheses. On the inside of the parentheses, we have 8.1 plus 2.9. Okay, well, 8.1 and 2.9 is what? What? 11. So 4 times 11. 4 times 11? 44. Yep. Okay, if this problem would have been 4 times 8.1 plus 6 times 2.9, is that what you're asking? You can't use the distributive property. You can't do any, there's no shortcut to it. Okay, you just have to multiply both of them out, and you still get this. Now, if it was this, so we can't use the distributive property there, but if it was this, that right there, okay, we can still use the distributive property, okay, because this right here, because of the commutative property, that right there is the same thing as that. Those two are the same. Okay, you can flip-flop multiplication terms and factors, and you're still at the same answer. Okay, now, let's see here. This one's a little harder just because we deal with the negative sign. 13 times 3 over 7 minus 13 times negative 4 over 7. Okay, so what's the common factor in each term? 13. So the 13 comes outside the parentheses. Inside we have 3 over 7 minus negative 4 over 7. I'm going to erase those parentheses and put it like this. Okay, now here's where most people would make their mistake. 13, 3 over 7, change that to addition, do the opposite of negative 4/7, which is positive 4/7. Now, what do you have inside the parentheses? And what is that? 1. So I have 1 on the inside, 13 on the outside. And that would be 13. All right, let's say I had this. Let's say I had 3 times 12.2. Okay, I can use the distributive property, and I can say this. I can take 12.2 and make it 12 plus 0.2. Put that in parentheses, times 3. Now I can take and distribute the 3 to both of those things. Three times 12 is what? 36. What's 3 times 0.2? 0.6. Put the two together, 36.6. Now understand that that works regardless of what number's outside the parentheses. In other words, you could have 22 times 12.2. Okay, well that's still 22 times 12 plus 22 times 0.2. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's a 2-digit number, a 3-digit number, or what, you're still going to end up with the same thing. Okay. Now, let's say we had 24 times 13. Well, I can make the 13 10 plus 3 and multiply it by 24. Well, I can take and distribute the 24 times 10 plus 24 times 3. Now, most of you, if you had 24 times 13, would have to take and multiply it out on paper. Well, now that we've used the distributive property, you may be able to do it in your head. Okay? What is 24 times 10? 240. Just add a 0. Okay? Plus, what's 24 times 3? No. 72. Okay? You put the two together, then you get 312. Okay? Well, bottom line is, you've used the distributive property ever since probably the 3rd or 4th grade. You just didn't know it. For example, if I had 13 times 24, well, you would do this. Right? That's what we would have done since probably 3rd or 4th grade. Well, you multiply that out. 4 times 3 is 2, carry my 1. 4 times 1 is 4 plus 1, 52. Okay? Let's see, I think I got to reverse that. Yeah, hang on, I got to reverse it. Do it this way. Okay, 3 times 4 is 12, carry my 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1, 72. Bring down my 0, 4, 2. 312. And if we look, 72. Right there. 240. Right there. Okay, so you've been using the distributive property since you've been learning how to multiply, two-digit numbers, or three-digit numbers, four-digit numbers, whatever it is. Okay, so it's not necessarily a new concept. Now, if they tell you, for example, they give you this right here, and they tell you to write or use the distributive property and make an equivalent expression. Okay? Well, all they want you to do is this. They want you to take and distribute the 8 to both things and get 8 times 100 minus 8 times 4. And that's your answer. Okay, now, if they tell you to evaluate it, then you have to do that and go on through and finish it out if they tell you to evaluate. Okay, if they tell you to evaluate that expression, then you would have to take and go, okay, 8 times 100 minus 8 times 4. 8 times 100 is 800 minus 8 times 4, which is 32. And that's 768. Okay, so this one is what these directions tell you, and then this one is what evaluate means. Okay, because it'll have two different types of problems in the work. All right, your homework. Still got about 12 minutes left in class. We're going to have 6.7. One through 25. Okay, that is due on Friday. Tomorrow in class, we'll have a short little quiz over Chapter 6. Okay, be covering addition, subtraction of integers, multiplication of division of integers. Okay, so make sure you've got those rules down for tomorrow's quiz. All right, so get to work on 6.7.